Hey YouTube, okay, I'm making, like actually for real this time, making my YouTube comeback for the summer. I wanted to make a quick little video to talk about what I have read, what I'm currently reading, and what I would like to read this summer, because as I tweeted on my Twitter, this summer is my retirement summer. And what does that mean? Basically, I'm unemployed. So I have enough money in my bank account, very fortunate to have that, where, you know, I could work, but, you know, it's not like a great necessity. You know, I wanted to take the summer to really focus on catching up on reading. I also really want to focus on like artistic creation. I've made a few collages, which maybe I'll show off in a different video, like that. But I think that that's really good for me because I haven't really physically done any creative work in a very long time. And I also really want to focus on my writing. We're gonna start with what I have read, which literally is not much. I've read 2 books this summer. And let's talk about them. The first book I actually finished this summer is Just Kids by Patti Smith. I got this at one of my favorite bookstores in Milwaukee. It's called Downtown Books, bought and sold. My favorite thing is that the prices are so good. And this is something that I looked at when I went there over winter break, but I didn't end up getting it. And I got Jazz by Toni Morrison and a little short story collection of gay fiction. But I decided to get this time. And this was really interesting to me because I thought, you know, there would be a little bit more about, I guess, like how she like her album creation, but there wasn't really a lot of that. It was really a lot more about, you know, becoming an artist, and it was really centered on obviously her relationship, friendship, whatnot with Robert Mapplethorpe. And reading this book is actually what inspired me to, you know, devote my summer to, you know, artistic creation, what got me into collaging, because when she was talking about her own artwork and then Robert Mapplethorpe's collaging and installations and things like that, that just like made me remember how much I love creating art. And their relationship is just so, it's so beautiful, and like the way that they both like helped each other create art, and like were both artist and muse, and just like how much love that she has for Robert. And there's so many great photographs in here, and Robert Mapplethorpe has for the past couple years been like one of my biggest inspirations when it comes to like fashion and styling. So it was fun to see those pictures and just hear about his artistic process. Yeah, it's just a very beautiful written book. There's some like fun little like stuff that almost sounds unreal, but it's just kind of like she was in New York at the right time to meet all of these famous people. Like her story of meeting Allen Ginsberg, like I just thought was really funny, and like meeting Jimi Hendrix and like Janis Joplin and all these people, and then just kind of mirroring her and Robert's like upbringing, and finding little connections, and then being like, I was doing this on this day, and on this day Robert was doing, like, it's just really interesting, like to see like their lives coming together and how they met by complete random chance. It just, I don't know, it makes me think a lot about how, you know, at the time you sometimes can't conceptualize like how important and monumental it is to meet somebody and bring somebody into your life, and then like, you know, looking back however many years later, it becomes like abundantly clear. And I don't know, just how people can come into your life and completely like make you who you are and change it. And I just thought this was such a beautiful book. Okay, and then the other book I just finished yesterday actually is Querelle de Brest. Actually this edition is just called Querelle, by Genet. I'd never read any Genet, but of course I'd heard of him. Big inspiration, I guess, to David Wojnarowicz. And this I found out about because my winter term, I took a class called Queer and Kinky German Culture, and one of our like little class activities was to kind of look at queer media. and things like that in like West Germany and then compare it to the US. And I was looking at like film, and West German film production companies had worked on 2 films as far as I know, for my research, and one of them was they like joint produced this French film, like this adaptation of this book, which I have yet to watch. I know it's on HBO Max, and I've been listening to the like motion picture score, and it's really good. But this I bought this because, you know, I had heard about that, you know, I heard about the movie, and then I was like, oh, it's a book, so I would like to read that, because also it's Jean Genet, and, you know, I've heard that he's quite interesting. First of all, I was telling my friend about this, like, this book, first of all, this translation is great, but there's a bunch of lines in here that I actually had to stop and like laugh out loud because they're so like unserious. And I thought it was funny, and I was like talking about the plot of this book to my friend. Oh, I should tell you guys the plot. Anyway, it's basically about this sailor named Querelle. Well, his name is actually like George, and then he goes by Joe, but he's also called Querelle, and it's narrated in a really like not odd, but like it's kind of a scattered novel. But he's this sailor, and he's like, you know, he's not straight. He's also a thief and a murderer, and how his only way to feel alive is to kill. And it's set in Brest, which is why it's called Querelle de Brest, and that's where the boat, I don't know anything about like sailors, but they're, you know, stationed in Brest for a while. And he also has a brother named Robert, and he is kind of just like low-key getting with everybody. But it's really interesting to like, it'll switch perspectives to other people, like the lieutenant, I think his name is like Lieutenant Sedlon or something. And then you have Mario, who's the police chief. And just kind of how all of these people are, obviously it's Jean Genet, so there's a lot of like homosexual sex in here. Can I say that on YouTube? I don't know. But how like sex and power work together, what it means to be masculine, what it means to take like a submissive role in sex acts, and like how men are constructing their super masculine image, but then also like kind of internally battling with, you know, queer desires, and how most of these characters can't really like confront that. Everybody is so infatuated with Querelle. It reminds me of the Harold Norse Memoirs of a Bastard Angel, where like everybody was like in love with this guy, and I'm like, were they really? But yeah, no, like literally everybody is like totally obsessed with Querelle, and just like the allure that he just has. It started off a little slow, and sometimes he would go on these like tangents. Anytime like the narrator of the book like talked to the reader or whatever, I was like, okay, I don't really care. But the overall storyline was really awesome. I enjoyed this a lot. I would like to reread it. The first edition of this book included drawings by Jean Cocteau, which I think is awesome. More to say on Jean Cocteau later. This is my current read. I'm trying to not be reading like 5 books at the same time, so this is the only thing I'm reading at the moment. It's Postcolonial Paris, Fictions of Intimacy in the City of Light by Laila, Amine. I hope I'm saying that right. She's a professor at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and this is looking at fiction, obviously, and kind of looking at post-colonial Paris and deconstructing these views we have of Paris as, you know, this great city of opportunity and like abundance and, you know, freedom, and looking at mainly like Arab populations in Paris and their experience, and how that's, you know, dealt with or not dealt with, and how it's dealt with in the novel. It looks at questions of, you know, manhood and masculinity. It looks at African-American expatriates writers moving to France, so it talks about James Baldwin and it talks about, you know, how these authors bring in these, you know, conflicts and this racism into their work, or maybe they don't, and kind of, you know, why that is. I think the most interesting section so far, in my opinion, was the one on where she mentioned Baldwin, because she talks about Richard Wright, and also talks about William Gardner Smith, who I'd never heard of before. And it's the second chapter, called Romance and Brotherhood. And just, there's so many awesome points in here. And it makes me think of, in French class, my senior year, I wrote like a 5-page paper or something about Paris and its function in the works of James Baldwin. And I don't think I'd read This Evening, So Soon, which is the work that Amine kind of talks about in this book. But I talked about Giovanni's Room, I talked about Paris in books like Another Country and Just Above My Head, and how, you know, Paris seems like this really liberationary city. Previous novels like Another Country and Giovanni's Room, you have white men in Paris who are, you know, able to find liberation in the fact that they're able to kind of act on and explore queer desire that they can't do in the United States. And this kind of opened my perspective, rightfully so, of like, yeah, it can offer some sort of, you know, sense of freedom and sense of manhood and sense of like identity outside of like being a black man or a black person in the United States. But, you know, you have these colonial powers, and in a lot of ways, you know, with all the violence and the segregation, it's not so different from the United States. And she really talks about this sense of brotherhood between, or impossibilities of brotherhood within Paris or France, specifically with African Americans, you know, coming to France to escape the United States, and then North Africans living in Paris specifically, in really horrible conditions and facing a lot of racism, and, you know, feeling like they've lost manhood and being, you know, painted by the media as, you know, violent and sexual predators and things like that. And so I really would like to read William Gardner Smith's novel, The Stone Face, because she talks about that in here. Okay, and then really quick, I'm gonna go through things I want to read. First of all, this is one I don't have on me. I told you I would talk about Jean Cocteau. I ordered a French edition of Les Enfants Terribles because I started reading a French version from my library at school fall term, and I was really enjoying it, but I didn't have the time to really focus on it, and because it's in like a language that I'm not entirely fluent in, it was taking a lot of focus. So I wanted to buy my own copy, and that way I can like write in the margins if I need to translate words or anything. But I do want to read it in its original French. I'm gonna go through really quick the other books I would like to read this summer. These I may not get around to, and I kind of feel bad about it. But these are kind of things that all of these books I've started reading and then put down for other things. But this is Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and Its Urgent Lessons for Our Own by Eddie S. Glaude Jr. This I got, how far did I get? I think I got to page 16. And not that it wasn't good, but I wanted to read other things. But obviously in our current political state, or I guess in our ever ongoing political state in this country, this seems incredibly relevant. This is The Cross of Redemption by James Baldwin. It's a Uncollected writings, and it starts off with like reviews, a lot of reviews of film and literature and things like that, and then it gets into essays. The reason I wanted this book is because there's an essay where he talks about Israel, and he has some very poignant things to say. And then finally, I just saw this on my bookshelf just now, and I was like, oh yeah, I should finish reading this. It's the Autobiography of Malcolm X, and I'd like to hear about his own life in his own words. And I also find the writings that James Baldwin did about him to be very beautiful. So those are all the books that I read, am reading, or want to read this summer. But welcome back to YouTube. Okay, goodbye.